Hello there, and welcome to Rule the Waves 3, Ironclads to Missile Cruisers. This has to be one of my favorite strategy games of all time, or rather, Rule the Waves 2 and now Rule the Waves 3 are. Rule the Waves 3 is the successor to Rule the Waves 2, which I played for a bit. Not extensively, but enough to really learn to appreciate it. But then I kind of put it on the shelf when I heard that Ruler Waves 3 was in development. And it landed sometime early first half of 2023, but I haven't really had time to play it until recently, and I am very, very pleased to have sort of jumped back in. I don't know if you have any knowledge of this game at all, but let's quickly summarize it. It has three layers, if I can call it that. It has a turn-based strategic level that goes month by month from 1890 up until 1970-ish. So if you play the full campaign, you can get about 1,000 turns in, which is quite. That's big. That's epic. That's huge. So that appeals to the turn-based player in me. There is also a very good ship design feature. It's kind of the core of the game in many ways. So throughout these 80 odd years, you keep up with technology development and build ever more bigger, often and more advanced ships. And then for the third part, that's two parts: turn-based strategy, ship design. In a very interesting period. It's like it says on the screen there, it stretches from Ironclads. That's not even pre-dreadnoughts, that's pre-dreadnoughts, and up until you get missile cruisers and jet fighters and helicopters and advanced submarines. So in those 80 years, there is a tremendous development of technology and fleets and tactics. And that is the third part of the game. You, within the context of the strategic layer, you get pitted into battles if war breaks out, which it does from time to time. So then you have to fight other navies, AI-run navies that have used their industry and their technology and their design principles to build the greatest warships they can, and then you mash them together. So those three things, it's a sort of a triangle of strategy up here and down below. In each corner you have the shipbuilding, and then you have the tactical gameplay. And the strategy part is, on the surface, it's rather simple, but it has a certain elegance and depth to it that you don't find in many games these days. You very quickly get into that. Just one more turn now. And then suddenly it's midnight, or well past midnight in some cases. So there is that. And the shipbuilding, of course, is brilliant, and we'll look at that as well. I mean, I've been a huge history and war history and naval history fan, so as long as I can remember. So I get to design my own warships. Wow, that that there just appeals to me. And then the battle section is really well done as well. So you really have the feeling that these could have been real fleets engaging in real battles. It's nothing short of amazing. You'll find nothing like it in the gaming world. So yeah, I think the original Ruler Waves 1 or the original, I think that was mainly the tactical component. You built the ships and then you fought battles. I don't think there was a strategy. I wasn't involved in that in any way. So, but Rule the Waves 2 had all these three things. So Rule the Waves 3 they takes it one step further, basically. And there are some changes, some big, some small, but I would say that biggest change between number 2 and number 3 is that the start date has been pushed to 1890. Before you couldn't start before 1900, so now you have the end of the Ironclad Age as well, which has some, you can't start at different points in time, but the game has sort of expanded in time, so it now also encompasses the end of the Ironclad Age and sort of the start of the pre-dreadnoughts, which is an incredibly interesting time period, which we will get back into. And it also extends the end of the game, so before you could sort of just touch onto that post-World War II era. But in Rule the Waves 3, you go all in on surface-to-air missiles, air-to-surface missiles, surface-to-surface missiles. You have helicopters, you have advanced jet fighters. But technology development sort of tapers off. The game goes to 1970 or something like that. I don't think... No, the game ends. You cannot play it past the end of 1989, but the sort of the soft end of the game is 1970 because nothing of technological importance happens after that. And I would say that at some point in the 60s there just isn't a lot of things going on, so yeah, that's sort of the game ends on December 31st 1969 for all intents and purposes. Though you can sort of keep playing, but it gets increasingly pointless. So yeah, that was sort of a little bit about Rule the Waves 3 and what it is and what it isn't. And to sort of round off this introduction, I would... why am I having the pointer on my face? It can go up there. So why am I making this series of videos? This is sort of a playthrough slash tutorial slash motivational video, because although this is, in my mind, one of the very best strategy games ever created, it does have some challenges. There are two specific challenges. I mean, it's a game. There are odds and ends and quirks and things that some players like and others don't. But there are two things in particular that we will address here. The first one is the user interface and kind of the graphic part of the game. That is, it has a charm, but it is... I think the tactical battles and the look of the ships, great stuff. But the user interface is just horrendous. So, and if you follow me through this, then maybe I can help you get past that, because I had to grapple a bit with all the buttons and things. And I'm a little bit disappointed that they didn't... The game doesn't need a fundamental change in how it works, but it could definitely have some user interface upgrades to make it more playable. There are more tool tips and sort of, but buttons are all over the place and often hard to read, and yeah, it can be a challenge. That's one. Two, the game is vague when it comes to many of its mechanics, and I know that it's a deliberate choice from the designer. They don't want the players to sort of be able to optimize just by looking at game files or reading the manual with lots of tables and and stuff. But that goes for almost every part of the game, some more than others. For example, off the top of my head, everything that has to do with submarines, trade warfare, surface raider, counters to those raiders, mines, mine sweeping, those sort of things, extremely vaguely explained. And there are other things that it's mentioned in the manual, but you get frustrated because you think you know what's going on, but then you don't. And yeah, it's since it's a game, you're supposed to have fun. It's not supposed to be your doctorate or your thesis. I think it demands too much investment from players, so that it's much less accessible than it could be. So hopefully I can sort of shed some light over some of the mechanics that I have learned more about through play or through asking on the forums and the Discord and that sort of thing. I mean, it's a huge, very helpful, well, huge, relatively speaking, but an active community that's very helpful, very quick, and gives often detailed answers to your question, and will listen to you rant when you get frustrated. So they have been very helpful. But anyway, we are going to start a new game, a new campaign, because that is the best way to illustrate all of this, and hopefully you can have some fun watching. Yeah, idea is to sort of document everything, but there could be some instances if I have to do some reorganizing of the fleet and some odds and ends of administrative work, that I could do it sort of off screen, so you don't sit through me clicking through menus and lists for like 10 minutes at a time. I don't think that would be very interesting. But every choice, every event, every battle, those will be recorded. So on to setting up a new game. So these other buttons are pretty obvious. Exit, about, continue. That's sort of the it starts off. It's a load game, but loads your last game. The other load lets you load your other save. But we are going to go for new game. And here is your first choice. Do you want to have the full experience, starting with the Ironclad Age and then playing for as long as you want? Or do you want to start out sort of well before, in our World War One? This is pre-dreadnought era. Ships are starting to look a bit like the battleships and cruisers that we know, but it's still not. Dreadnought, HMS Dreadnought hasn't arrived, and the all big gun battleship just doesn't exist. So you get that development. 1920. Oh, that was not what I was going to do, but 1920. That's all the key technologies for the big battleships have been developed, and this is sort of the height of the dreadnought, or the super dreadnought. They have 14, 15, 16-inch guns. They are still not super fast, but they are getting faster. Battle cruisers have been introduced, both in different kinds of battle cruisers, and planes are appearing or are about to appear, but they are just a joke at the moment. But very soon they won't be a joke. But if you start here, you can immediately build your dreadnoughts, pretty good dreadnoughts, and you still have years ahead of you with technological development and mostly surface actions, but spotter planes and later fighters and torpedo and dive bombers and carriers, of course, will start to play an ever bigger role on the battlefield. 1935, that's not so many years before the start of our World War II, so most players have a good idea what technology here is like. Battleships are big, fast, powerful. Cruisers are very fast and decently powerful. Destroyers haven't really come into their own. Subs are a thing. And planes and carriers are really starting to become more than a nuisance. And in just a few short years, they would completely dominate. So I would say each has its charms. But we will start here. There is one difference. 1900. I think that's sort of a legacy from Rule the Waves 2. You can start with what's called historical resources, because the game tries to be a good game. It doesn't try to simulate history. So normally England has maybe a little less resources than they historically did, and the other nations they're on a more level playing field. Well, Austria-Hungary is never going to outcompete the US in pure industrial output, but sort of the weaker nations have been boosted up a little bit, and the strongest nations have been taken down just a step to create a more level playing field. But the most powerful nations are still the most powerful nations. There's no question about that, but it makes it more of a game. But in 1900, you can start with historical resources, and then the tiny nations are really, really tiny. And England has twice the fleet of its competitors combined. That can be interesting. It's not for me. I'm here to play the game. So in my opinion, the historical resource route, that's not so interesting for me. In 1900, you can also get to design your legacy fleet, as it's called. So what's a legacy fleet? Well, you start with a number of ships already built and building using existing and earlier technologies. So the first order of the day is sort of to get a grip on your existing fleet and decide what ships to keep, what ships to upgrade, what ships to immediately scrap. But in 1900, you can check a box and then you can design your own legacy fleet. That's how I started out in Rule the Waves 2, and I really, really like that because I could make these amazing, well, relatively speaking, amazing ships compared to what AI would generate me. That no longer appeals to me. It was super fun in Rule the Waves 2 when I started out to start as the US, be very isolationist, watch my economy grow and just make really cool ships. I wasn't too interested in fighting battles, to be honest. I just wanted to build the ships. And so I didn't want any legacy ships because they are a mixed bunch, to say the least. But now, after I've played and starting at least to understand the game and its mechanics better, handling your legacy fleet is one of the most fun aspects, and definitely the most fun part about starting a new game. Oh, what am I going to get? And if you feel it's hopeless, you can always just start the game several times until you get something. Okay, this looks like something I could want to play with. Or you could go hardcore and just whatever I get, but I will play with it. And in many ways, the further you get, the worse it is. So in 1935, you can have some really good starting ships, but you can also have like some really trash ships that have 1916 tech and haven't been upgraded. So then you are presented with the horrible choice of scrapping it or spending an awful lot of time and money upgrading it. But this option is only available in 1900. So if you're into that kind of stuff, like I was in Rule the Waves 2, just when I started out, then I would recommend it. But yeah. But this is a playthrough for 1890. And here is the amazing interface. It's looking okay thus far, I think. So you can basically click on each flag here to see a little bit of a description of each power. So Great Britain and a description and sort of leader, that's just fluff. But government type can affect some events and other things. Build area, that's important. That's where your new ships and rebuilds pop out. So we'll look at the global map later. And yeah, the starting naval base budget is this number won't mean anything to you, but it's a quick compare. 31,500 versus 9,600 for China. China is a nation in 1990, so. And each nation will also have some special traits. Some are good, some are not as good. For example, the UK is a global naval power. That is not really a plus because you have to keep a lot of tonnage traveling around the globe, keeping your colonies under your thumb. Technology leader is very good, and efficient shipbuilding industry obviously also good. Hidden flaws, not so much. And then we have dock size, which limits how big your ship, the maximum size of your ship, but also the total tonnage that can be building and refitting. Next are some research advantages. There are research fields. We'll get more into those later, but obviously having a research advantage is a bonus. You can also have a research disadvantage like Japan has in radar and electronics. And this is based on historical events mostly, I think. And it's sort of to get some variety, but if you look at the Japanese, they did have good destroyers and torpedoes, and they were like, radar, what? We don't need radar, we have this big Koda mast, we can have a lot of fire control stations and searchlights and whatever. They never really got into the radar. Even the Germans, they had less advanced radar than the Allies, but they were definitely aware of the existence and usefulness of many kinds of radar and were working to put it on their ships. But the point is, you can have advantages. Research is easier, faster, and you can have disadvantages. You can also have these bonus techs. Those are usually rare techs that are available to all nations, but you don't necessarily get them. But Great Britain is, when the time comes, guaranteed to have the all-forward main armament. And basically that's the Nelson type layout with 3 or 2. Stall the turrets in front of the superstructure, and I give some weight savings for the ship, because you don't have to armor the citadel, or the citadel needs to be smaller, so you don't have to armor it as much. The ship get a decent protection. And that was historically the reason why the Nelsons turned out the Washington Naval Treaty and trying to sort of find a balance with all the needed traits for the ship, and then they landed on that particular layout. Also, yeah, and then is a list of the guns you start with. Naval guns, big guns, and small guns. The 2-inch is the smallest, and the biggest you can research is a 20-inch, which is maybe a little over the top, but can be fun. A little bit overkill, to be honest. Maybe not against the player, but the AI doesn't really design ships, I think, that requires a 20-inch gun. Okay. Other nations have other flaws and so like that. There's one more thing I'd like to say here, and that is what nation you pick also decides what kind of nations you will be opposed by and be allied with, because 2, 4, 6, 8, there can never be more than you and 8 opponents, so there are always 9 nations in play. But astute observers will see there are 10 flags here total, so one guy is always left out, and that is typically either Austria-Hungary or China. So for Japan, for example, you can see that Austria-Hungary disappears because yeah, up until the end of World War One, they had a pretty big and powerful navy that were optimized for contesting the Dalmatian Sea here with Italy and also maybe France, but it was a very specialized fleet. So if you play Japan, that's completely irrelevant, but instead you get a relatively weak China. And you can see here as well, if you play China, there is no Austria-Hungary. But if you play the US, there is no China, because China will eventually fall under the control of, well, some Western colonial powers, but also the Japanese invasion. But if you play Spain, then you can see that Russia suddenly is irrelevant. Yeah. So anyway, I'll try not to make this video too long, but I do want to include some of my thoughts on the key choices here, because when I started out, I was thoroughly confused. What's a good starting country? And I would say that don't pick China, that's too small and too weird. You can sort of do that later once you become an expert, but it's not going to be fun. Same with Spain, it's also a micro economy. And unless you really know the game, how to design the ships to fight the battle and sort of game the strategic layer, you're not going to have a great time. So no. When you're starting out, no China, no Spain. I would also say maybe take the US, but only take it if you are mostly interested in the shipbuilding aspect of the game. You don't really expect to get into a lot of war, because if you get into a war, you will have some trouble actually fighting those wars unless you know what you are doing with bases and range and allies and all that sort of stuff. So, and also the US is easy mode. You will have the best tech, and not in 1890, but in a few decades you will be have both the biggest fleet and the strongest economy, and you're just best in everything. So if that appeals to you, then definitely go for the US. The UK starts stronger than the US, but doesn't develop as fast. So, but it will remain a very powerful naval nation throughout the entire game. So, but it can also be a very interesting sort of nation to play, mostly because it has colonies all over the world, and therefore has a chance to get involved with every other power. And yeah, no, it's not my favorite. I think I'd rather play the US, but I feel like my US days are done. I did that when I just like to build ships, like the feeling of, I suppose, being superior. I'm not saying the USA is superior to everyone else, but in this game they are potentially superior to everyone else. So there is that. Austria-Hungary is we took the bottom two and the sort of the top two, and now I think we are moving into another area that I'm not so interested in. I see a lot of people enjoy what you can do with Austria-Hungary because you have a good defensive position up here. And the Med is a nice enough place. You can screw over Spain and Italy, and France has a big interest in the Med. So there are plenty of things going on. So that's could be a good nation once you have your sea legs. But it's not my favorite, really. You end up spending a lot of time in the Med, so I'm not going so many other places. So to me, it feels kind of limited, but it's a viable option, I think. And then Russia starts pretty strong in 1890, then slowly declines, I would say, both in technology and naval resources. It also has one big problem. First of all, its building zone is in the Baltic, so it always has to go through Germany. And it also has to contend with both the UK and France in the North Sea. So you basically have to go through all these three nations, which are three rather powerful nations. And not shown on this map, of course, is the Russian Far East, which is in the same spot as Japan. So you basically have a decent-ish fleet and economy, but your fleet is split in two, with one part bottled up by the three of the strongest naval powers, and one with Japan, which gets really strong after a while, and you can also run afoul of the US. And getting ships from the Baltic to the Far East, yeah, historically that went very poorly for the Russian Empire pre-World War One, so it's no different here. So you could take it as a challenge, but I find it just very boring. Well, boring slash bloody annoying. So that rules out China and Spain. They are just too small. I would say US and UK are too big. Russia too weird. Austria-Hungary too limited. So where does that leave me? It leaves me with Germany, with France, with Japan, and Italy. And each has their charm and challenges. We can start in Asia first. Japan starts out very weak. Kind of have to build your ships in the UK shipyards, which is very historical. But then after a while, while your economy is never as strong as some of these Europeans and the US, your naval budget goes up to an acceptably high level, and there is plenty of opportunity for you to get into fights and steal some colonies and beat up China. And then eventually you could try to tackle the UK and or the US. So that is a fun challenge. A little drawback for me is that your home area is up in the Northeast Asia sector, far from Europe and relatively far from the US West Coast, so it kind of feels lonely at times. You don't get the intimacy of being bottled up here, either in the Med or the North Sea. So, but it's definitely one of the more fun nations to play, and I very much considered doing this playthrough as Japan. But spoiler alert, we're not. Then you have France, which is in this context relatively friendly with Great Britain. They are not ancestral enemies anymore. You can get into wars, no problem, but you can also be great friends and allies. Not so much with Germany, and not so much with Italy. So as France, you can see that you have inconsistent naval policy. That sounds fun. But you also have some bonus tax, and your economy starts middling plus, but you don't really get the same economic boost as, say, the US or even Germany. So you're always lagging a little bit behind, and you are not a technology leader, so you are usually pretty advanced, but you're not up there with the big boys. That presents some interesting challenges. You also have to contend heavily with both the North Sea and, as you can see, of course, the Mediterranean. So you sort of have two home zones here that are both hotly contested. So this makes for an interesting game. That's the point. Who can you fight? Who are your neighbors? What sort of developments can you hope for? And France also has not as big as the UK, but you have some colonies scattered about from the Caribbean to the Pacific and Africa, and so forth. So you have sort of a colonial empire to take care of if you find that interesting, and I think that is interesting. The more it's spread out and the more interactions you have, the more fun it gets. Italy is in many ways both France's little brother and Austria-Hungary's bigger brother. Sort of sits between them, I would say, not only on the map, but in its role. It's solely limited to the Mediterranean, unlike France, so it's both good and bad. It's good because you can more easily control the Med, or at least heavily influence it, and you have good basing options for your planes later on, and so forth and so forth. But other than some North African and a colony down on the east side of Africa, you don't really have a colonial empire to care about, and you lose out / are cut out of the Northern Europe competition. So if you don't want to play Austria-Hungary, if you want a little bit more colonial and a little bit more, what should we say, economy, you can do Italy. But you have a bunch of negative traits that you don't have as Austria-Hungary. You are cautious, poor education, inconsistent naval policy, some corruption. So there's a lot to deal with here. We are not going to go into detail every little thing here, but none of these are good for you as a player. So you start with, for the time, good dock size, good naval budget, but you have a lot of drawbacks as well. So that leaves us with Germany, which is the subject of this series. We are going to be playing as Germany. No, the Germany of 1890 is not the Germany of World War I that fought the British as Jutland. You start with a pathetically small navy, and also your economy is not great. If you compare your budget to France, you compare it to Italy, you compare it to Austria-Hungary. Yeah, it's better than Austria-Hungary, but it is way worse than Italy, France, Russia, and minuscule compared to... No. You really have to work to build up your fleet, and you really want to avoid any senseless wars early on until you sort of have produced your first generation of homegrown ships. So, limited democracy, leader Kaiser, Northern Europe, obviously. You are cautious. That means that you do not like losing ships. Even if you win battles, if you lose some ships, you risk value calling unrest rising, so you really want to keep your losses down, or you could face a government change. Technology leader is good. That means if you're lagging behind in a tech field, then you will more quickly catch up. Bombastic head of state sounds negative, and it kind of is because of the Kaiser and later maybe a Führer. If you become a fascist country, that's a possibility. will give you directions from time to time, and sometimes that doesn't make sense. Other times there can be a hidden advantage in some of the options. We'll look at that a bit later. Cautious you can get rid of, technology leader you can't, but that's a good thing. It's bombastic head of state. Well, whoever runs Germany is bombastic. End of story. Kaiser or Führer, doesn't matter. Get these bombastic head of state events from time to time. But we have plenty of research advantages: armor, damage control, armor piercing, projectiles, zeppelins, lighter than air. That's not so useful, but okay, we'll take what we get. But missile tech, oh, it's always sweet when you're the first nation to develop surface-to-surface, surface-to-air missiles, and it war erupts and you sort of slam into the enemy who are fighting with just the battleships and the carriers, and suddenly missiles are raining into his ships. Great stuff. Bonus tech, cross-tech fire. That's a weird pre-dreadnought or dreadnought, early dreadnought thing where a broadside battery can, because the middle of the ship has a break in the superstructure. The superstructure is sort of forward and aft. There is a break in the middle. Then you can spin your guns around and shoot in a relatively narrow arc on the other side of the ship. It looks weird, wonderfully weird. So if I can, I will always try to build some ships with cross-tech fire. That's not a tech everyone picks up, and definitely not a tech everyone will try to use. Bomb and torpedo. Yeah, what was that? I don't remember. I think that has. Yeah, it turns some of your bomb hits into torpedo strikes, so they maybe do more underwater flooding damage. We'll get back to it once it becomes relevant. Specialized submarine design. Yeah, I think you're guaranteed to get sort of mine-laying subs and all sorts of special subtypes. These are the guns you start with, not so interesting. Yeah. Wow, that was a lot of talk. Yeah, quick break here. Just hit the OK button, basically. From here, and then we will, yeah, I will take a short break here and come back. Okay, let's finalize this this bit. This is the options screen. Already I had many questions when I started playing this, because the manual for Ruler Waves 3 is a lot better than the manual for Ruler Waves 2, but it, like I said initially, it's deliberately vague, and too vague, I think, making the game less accessible than it could be. So your name, that's just for fun. It's not really used in any way in the game, so it's Phonec, because that's the name I usually use. I use it for my Panzer Corps 2 playthrough, so I'm using it here as well, and also it fits because I'm German. Fleet size. It's a contentious subject, I think, because bigger is obviously better. You can go all the way up. Medium is the default, but you can go all the way up to super large. Yeah. So my thinking here is that you actually get to see more of the game if you play with a smaller fleet. Maybe not small, or yeah, small is fine, but very small, that gets too specialized. But the point is, the bigger your fleet, the more administration you have to do. I mean, if you play as one of the bigger economies, Germany included, if you play at the biggest fleet size, there's going to be a lot of ships, and there's going to be a lot of time spent just managing all of those ships and squadrons and whatever. But if you play on a smaller setting, then you get the same, but you have less administration, and it's also easier to get it sort of attached to specific ships that are part of several good battles. And yeah, this von Moltke battle cruiser. It's been with me since 1930, and it has sunk a lot of ships. And it doesn't really have a sister ship, but it has the von d'Artan, which is based on it, but slightly bigger and faster. An altogether better ship, but it always gets damaged and has to return to port. Sort of stories develop, and you get attached to specific ships. And you know what? I'm gonna upgrade this, even though it's not that useful anymore. But when you play on the biggest fleet sizes, you you will have 2, 3, 4 for smaller ships, even more ships that are exactly the same. You will produce them in batches, and if one blows up, then yeah, whatever. You have more coming along the line, and you were going to scrap that class in 5 years anyways. It's not a problem. So it's a very different play style. And also very many of the battle scenarios are sort of cruiser action or actions with small units or destroyer raids. So huge fleet battles aren't always that common. They do definitely happen. But when they do happen on a smaller fleet, then it doesn't feel as epic. That's the drawback. I mean, if you play on super large and you get a fleet battle and the battle generator decides that, yeah, basically everything you have and everything the opponent had, that gets mashed together in one massive battle. That battle is going to be more massive on super large than on medium. So what are my favorites? Well, medium is fine. I think large or larger, that gives you some leeway. You can sort of have classes of ships where you produce 2 or 3 of them, and it's also a bit more forgiving if you run into some, well, the ship blows up or it gets sunk by a submarine that torpedoes it. Then you have other ships. They are not so hamstrung if you play on large or larger. Very large, I don't see a point, to be honest. Why not? It's either around medium, small, medium, large. It's basically the same experience. Larger starts to feel much larger. Very large, I've never tried because I don't see the point. If you're going beyond larger, why not just go super large? That's my thinking. You could have other experiences. So, research rate. If you slow the research rate down, you get tech more slowly. So if you halve it, then you're never gonna have any of even the basic techs. Then 50 years will only lead to 25 years of technological development. Well, approximately. Techs are also gated by year, so I think that even if you slow it by 50%, you don't truly slow it by 50%. Maybe you are effectively at 60%. I'm just guessing here, but yeah. Anyway, so I think that if you want to play around in technology, develops super fast. I mean, in the start, by the time your ship hits the water, especially the big ships, they are, if not obsolescent, then not far from it because something better is already coming along. So if you slow the research rate a bit, 90 or 80%, 80 or 90, I suppose you could do 85 as well. I've tried both, and my golden spot is somewhere around there. If you say 80, then 10 years in the game is 8 years of tech development. So if you go from 1819 to 1940, that's 50 years. So by the time we hit 1940, our tech will be 1930-ish, but probably a little more advanced because of the year gates. But just to give you an approximate idea, slight tech variation. What none means that you strictly follow the dates given for the text, so they will appear not necessarily in order, but they will appear in a relatively predictable order and at predictable times. Which, for example, in 1890 you start with cemented. That's the standard armor type. It sucks, and then you get Harvey armor in not the distant future, and then you know that crap armor is just around the corner. So you sort of decide to put all your research, or as much research as you can, into armor development, and you just postpone building new battleships until you have that sweet crop armor, because then you know you can have that battleship around for much, much longer than some stupid ironclad with Harvey or even compound armor. So that gets a little bit gamey. But if you use Slight, the game will sort of take the deck of text and sort of shuffle it around a little bit, not too much, but maybe Harvey armor gets delayed, or maybe it appears immediately, almost immediately, like in a year or so. But crop armor is very much delayed, so if you are sitting around waiting for crop armor to appear, you're going to be hugely disadvantaged. You don't know that. Yeah. So the manual says something about deliberately vague here as well. Considerable. The year variation is bigger, but text can also be more or less powerful. So torpedoes could maybe hit less or have less power or more. Or triple turrets could have a hidden penalty, that sort of thing. The problem here is that the manual is so vague that I don't want to commit to something I really don't understand. But also this slight one, that's enough to just, yeah, I have to research, I will prioritize this and that, but I will just make my ships when I need to make new ships with whatever tech's available. I can't just sit around waiting, because I know that in 1904 I am very likely to have this or that gun or something like that. Just random examples. Harsher peace deals. That's a yes or no. By default, it's off. Even if you win the war, you might not get any spoils of war. Or just a tiny fraction, and this feels quite historical, because yeah, you squabble, you fight the war, but things don't really change that much. But this is a game, and it can be a little boring to just completely trash the enemy, and then yeah, it's a white piece, you get nothing. So wow, I spent 3 years fighting really hard, my economy is shit, and no, the Reichstag has cut my budget to nothing, and yeah, great stuff. You know what, I'm not gonna fight any more wars, I'm just gonna sit in the corner here and design ships. So from a gamer perspective, I think the harsher peace deal is a great thing to play with, but also be aware that it skews things a little bit, because you are a player. You also have the power to load your save games if things go completely south, I suppose. In real world, you didn't. So if you start as Germany or any other nation in 1890 and you have 80 years to fight small and big wars with other nations and steal their colonies and territories and stuff, or demand more reparations, it's going to accumulate. So by 1940, you could have a Reich that has colonies all over Africa and Pacific and yeah, whatever, and controls the Baltic and Norway, Finland, and the Baltic nations, that sort of thing, which obviously gives you a stronger position and so forth and so forth. But that's why you play the game, isn't it? Because you want to have fun and you want to see a development. This is why people like games where your characters gain XP, because this is a visual representation that you are doing something right. And also, it's not really a problem that you have more colonies, because colonies and territories other than your homeland, even for the UK, which has huge territories that you cannot even conquer, like India, Australia, and South Africa, the contribution to the total economy is actually very small. So even if I go all in with Germany to seize every colony I can, it's not going to materially affect my economy. And I might as well, instead of taking territories, just ask for war reparations, but that is boring. Yeah. AI advantage, yeah, I suppose every AI could use an advantage, but while I have played some Rule Waves 3, I'm not the world's greatest player, so I'm just gonna leave that off for now. This one, I think, goes well in hand with a mild reduction in research rate, because this will slow down the appearance and development of airplanes by, I don't have an exact figure, but you won't have any functional airplanes in 1920. Played as the US, you can see here earlier in January, and I sort of played from 1890 to 1959, and funnily enough, that was on 80 slow aircraft, and guess what? The US was the last nation to invent aircraft. I think it was close to 1930 before I was able to feel even a converted aircraft carrier and some shitty planes. Everyone else, even Austria, Hungary, and Spain, were flying around with aircraft and carriers, and it was quite embarrassing, but fun. So this is sort of my sweet spot, 80s light, harsher piece deals, because I want to see things happen, because this is a game, and slow aircraft development. Because I think these two sort of mesh well together. You get a delay in the general development of technology, which also kind of affects not the appearance and development of aircraft, but some of the techs directly contribute to the effectiveness of aircraft. So there is a link there. So I think about 80, 85, 90 and slow aircraft, that lets me play with big gun battleships for a bit longer, which I think is fun. Yeah. But I'm also starting to appreciate the carrier aspect of the game more, but more about that later, and the missile age for that matter. Yeah. Oh wait, this is not carriers, this is land-based aircraft. And some people absolutely hate it when squadrons of land-based aircraft suddenly appear in the skies and shoot down their fighters or bomb their carriers or whatever. But I mean, you can easily have fleet carriers with 100 planes or more, and you can have several squadrons of, or flotillas or divisions, whatever you want to call them, of carriers. You can have 6 big fleet carriers in one battle. You can have 600 planes hunting for the enemies, and then I don't see the problem. And also it really gives a different feel to playing in different parts of the world. Like the Baltic is very different from the Pacific. The Mediterranean is different from, yeah. These are constrained waters with plenty of air bases nearby. The Baltic and the Mediterranean, and there's a very different feeling if you control the territories around, and therefore have aircraft based there, or if you have land-based aircraft working against you. And again, that I think fits well with the harsher piece deals part, because it rewards you more for being able to seize land and establish your air bases. But you can sort of take this down. This is the maximum number of aircraft each base can have, and it can be from 60 to 120. But in my opinion, in my experience, limited though it might be, then the key here is how big your fleet is. If you're running super large fleets, then even if there are multiple big air bases nearby, they are more of a nuisance, or not a nuisance, but it's something you can plan for rather than something that will completely overwhelm you. So if I was playing on small, medium, then I would gladly drop down to say 60. But now that we have decided to sort of accept the administration, we are actually going to go over the default max, which is 100, and go all the way to 120. But don't expect to see a lot of good aircraft wings. This is also work for my mild OCD, I would say, because if we assume 10 plane squadrons, then this fits exactly 10 squadrons, and that pleases my mind greatly. So to get any further, you have to pick one of these save slots. You can see here that this is the 29th of January, yeah. You can see that on yesterday I was playing both my Germany campaign. That has run its course, I feel, because now I have good planes and missiles, and no one else has gotten to missiles yet. So I had a clash with first the Soviets and then the Franco-British alliance, and it was just, yeah, I sat there watching missile after missile, both surface and air launch, just slam into the enemy fleet, and it completely broke them apart. And then my battle line just rolled them up, and then my carrier wings just finished off everything. And it's pretty awesome to see the technological development and what it can do. At this stage, enemy ships are finally packing out of heavy anti-air and radar-guided air defense guns and whatnot, but they are useless when they are suddenly faced with standoff weapons like surface missiles or air-launched missiles. Anyway, I also started a few games. You can see the start date, January 1890, as Germany, just to get a feeling for what it's like on this super large size, because this game here is played on medium and with no variation, nothing on research, no peace deals, just the default options, because I wanted to have a feeling, what's it like to play for a while as Germany, maybe learn some lessons before I jumped into this sort of bigger campaign with what I think are my favorite settings, and hopefully impart some of what I've learned to you. So I'm not going to delete my main save in case I want to, but I can save it here. Yeah, you have only 9 saves, but it's very easy to go on your C drive under Steam apps, find Ruler Waves 3, and just copy the entire save folder. So if you do that, you can have backups, or not sure what I should call it, but you can easily grab your saves and store them for later, so you can, with a little bit of work, have more than 9 saves. And this is just legacy. There is no reason why a game from 2023 should limit you to just 9 saves. That's probably buried deep in the original code, so probably didn't want to mess with that. Okay, I hope that this was sort of episode 0, I would say. A pretty long episode 0. I hope you haven't bored you to tears. So next time we meet, we'll look at our starting fleet and start to deal with it. Okay, until next time.